Hi, folks. So great to be here. Thanks for joining. My name is Erin Blanding. I use she, her pronouns for descriptive access as we get going. I'm a white, cisgendered, queer, chronically ill person. I have brown hair. I'm wearing black rimmed glasses. I'm wearing a bright burnt orange shirt, some small hoop earrings. And my background is very plain with nothing hanging on the wall behind me. I wish there was. I'm joining you today with deep gratitude and appreciation from my home on Treaty 4 territory, the land from between the Lake Purchase, which is the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Neutral, the Anishinaabe people, and it's situated on the Haldeman Tract, which is land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River, where I like to walk with my dog in the afternoons. I'm a first-generation settler on these lands, and I'm coming by way of 12 years situated on Tohono O'odham traditional territory in the Sonoran Desert on the Arizona-Mexico border. And prior to that, growing up with my family between Mi'kmaq land on Prince Edward Island and the land of the semi-autonomous Native American nations of the Navajo, the Hopi, the Ute, and the Zuni tribes of the southwestern United States on the Colorado Plateau. So that's the land that I have grown up on and has shaped who I am and what I bring to spaces. I'm very humbled, I'm nervous, and I'm glad to be here with you all today to do my best to sit with some questions and provocations and invitations for all of us, including me, to continue to deepen into the vital work of always becoming facilitators for anti-oppressive leadership in this ongoing life journey. I'm feeling in many ways deeply unqualified to be holding this space myself, and originally thought I was on a panel, but I also know that true facilitative leadership means often many of us in positions of power who are given this kind of space are being asked to show up and hold space, be vulnerable, mess up, and apologize, to take accountability, and to keep trying again. So I welcome this space for that work, and also should say that I'm deeply in the struggle of this work myself and in my organization right now. And that struggle is really real. So thank you for joining in that with me. I also want to name that I'll just be talking. I unfortunately don't have any slides to show, which I understand can be really challenging for folks who would benefit from visuals for their learning. I'll speak as slowly and as clearly as I can. But I also know this is being recorded, so hopefully that can support y'all in coming back to the space as needed. I also want to name that I can't see any of you in the space. That feels really weird to know that you're out there, but to not be able to engage and interact with you all. But I'd appreciate it if you can use the live chat to introduce yourselves to each other in a way that feels good for you. So I can also see who we have joining us today. I'm looking to my right because I'm registered on the live chat too. And so introducing yourselves, even your contact information, to be able to be in space with each other. I'm so grateful that you're choosing to spend your time here. Your time is so precious. But use the chat for engagement, not just with the content that I'm sharing, but with each other. So asking questions, sharing inquiries or ideas that you're sitting with or working on. So this can become a much more dynamic learning space than I could create just on my own. So please continue to do that as much as possible in the next 20 or so minutes. By sharing a little bit about my positionality in this work, I'll share that I've been on a personal and professional quest of sorts to understand and deeply interrogate the kind of learning and leadership that will be required of us to create a truly just and lasting change in our world, to address the challenges that we're being faced with today and in the days to come, and to create or reimagine ways of being together that will actively sunset or compost old ways of leading that are rooted or tied to oppressive systems and structures that create harm and will not lead us close to the world that we need to see. The reference I just made to composting old ways of being comes from the amazing work of Vanessa Machado de Oliveira in her book, Hospicing Modernity. And I'll do my best to share references of those whose work guides my own throughout the next few minutes. None of the ideas that I share are mine. I stand on the shoulder of giants, in particular the Black, Indigenous, and racialized women, trans and disabled folks who have been leading in movement spaces for hundreds of years. This work is theirs, just the ways that I bumble through it, and their learnings are entirely my own. Tangibly, the quest that I've been on has seen me in positions of power and privilege as a quote unquote hierarchical leader in organizations with large teams, working in place-based and cross-regional or national contexts, creating social justice and leadership programming, as well as working for many seemingly progressive nonprofit and charitable leaders in the sector. My background is also heavily rooted in activism and movement organizing, in particular, migrant rights and migrant justice work, disability justice. And for the past number of years, as I've come back to organizing spaces in so-called Canada, I organize heavily with showing up for racial justice, gathering predominantly white folks into anti-racist action. So all of this work requires me to facilitate in very diverse systems and structures to work towards what we believe is the ultimate purpose of collective liberation. And I've been able to immerse myself in the teams I work in anti-oppressive frameworks. But I think as many of us have experienced, especially in the last number of years, in 2020, I had a personal reckoning. I quit full-time nonprofit charitable work that I'd been in for about 20 years and spent close to a year in a personal crisis. COVID was in full swing. I had just left another organization in a long line, 4 in a row, that was proposing solutions for creating equitable change in the world without matching those principles and how it treated its staff and created its leadership structures. I was not only burnt out, but I got incredibly sick, and I was on the pathway to discover I'd been living with a chronic illness. So in that time, I was reminded of the work of Grace Lee Boggs, an amazing activist who I had the honor of sharing space and time with in her Detroit home over a multi-year period. And she always used to ask of all of us who shared space with her, what time is it on the clock of the world? And any big fans of Adrienne Maree Brown's work will often hear her quote this. Grace was a mentor of hers. It's become such a valuable question. And I remember sitting, having the privilege of time, though not much, because I still needed a job to make money pretty soon, to think about that question. What time is it on the clock of the world? COVID was raging. A racial reckoning was continually happening. Companies and organizations were understandably getting called out for how they were or weren't supporting their staff well-being. And I personally didn't know where my work was. And I was very confused, watching organizational leaders push the envelope potentially with their external work, creating programming or innovative products and offerings that were quite creative and innovative and impactful. But I watched as they struggled with understanding that unless internal cultures and ways of working for their teams reflected the liberatory values and principles of their mission, they would not achieve the outcomes that they were promising. So I personally made the leap to turn inward and move into the HR space. I found a role within Make Way, an organization guided by a CEO whose own integral life practice journey and track record of creating radical leadership spaces in organizations was well known. And this role was purposely created to not require a traditional HR background, which was good, but instead desired someone to come and create new pathways for ways of working and being that were anti-oppressive, hopefully working towards creating uncolonized or decolonized spaces, and ultimately make way for a team and its practices to reflect ways of working that we believe actually would change the world. So the crux of that work, and this work is a practice, a daily practice of facilitative anti-oppressive leadership. How are we being stewards or guides or barrier breakers or weavers and pathfinders, models, sometimes good models and bad, and practitioners of how to be on an ongoing journey of anti-oppression? And when we think about anti-oppression and anti-oppressive frameworks, this refers to the processes and methods or practices through which we understand how systems of oppression, so systems like ableism, colonialism, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, understanding how those systems of oppression result in both individual discriminatory actions and structural and systemic inequalities, inequities for historically marginalized groups in society. So understanding how those systems of oppression result in individual discriminatory actions and structural and systemic inequities. So the current systems and structures of our organizations and companies do lead to the oppression of particular groups of people. And so those of us in whatever position of power have a duty to work towards addressing this in particular. We all have a duty to work towards addressing this, especially those of us in organizations who are trying to work towards social and environmental good. And in the process of dismantling systems that aren't working and oppressive systems that we know aren't serving everyone, in particular folks who have been historically marginalized, we also at the same time need to understand that we're perpetuating those systems. So especially those like myself with relative privilege and dominant culture, I have to understand that the work of addressing those needs to also be personal. And in fact, it needs to be fourfold. So how am I doing personal, social, institutional, and systemic shifting all at the same time? So that personal work, the inner work, which is, interrogating my personal biases, privilege and positionality, shifting my behaviors, learning from my mistakes, apologizing and taking accountability, and then trying again, building relationships with others that I don't normally have relationship with. How am I working in the social context with teams, creating different team cultures and ways of working? At the institutional level, our organizations and how our institutions are interacting and building policy and practice and programs that are shifting, and then looking systemically, looking at across systems. So again, doing that all at the same time. And so I just wanted to put some questions forward that I and we are sitting with often. They are not all of the questions, but I think they could be helpful. And then I'd love to, if you're able to put some questions for y'all to put some questions in the chat of things you're sitting with around like the practices of how do we build anti-oppressive spaces, and how do we find new ways of leading to build anti-oppressive practices within our organizations. So here are some of the questions that I've been sitting with and some points around that. The first is around, are we building foundations that support trust building? So knowing that change happens at the speed of trust. I think the plenary this morning was talking about that. Or as Melanie Goodchild shared with a friend of mine, is change happening at the speed of relationship? And are we building foundations that support good, trust-based relationships? So some of the ways to do that, I think, that we've tried out that seem to be working. First was a few years ago during COVID, actually looking to support some of our staff with better compensation and benefits that actually would support folks who, all of our staff, and in particular a time during COVID and during the Great Resignation period, where also organizations were struggling financially. We still decided to do a massive compensation review and review of our total benefits and rewards to show that it really mattered that our staff were taken care of and could earn a living wage and had accessible benefits packages. And so that was like one very significant shift that we did in order to say that we're actually here to create systems and structures that support all of our folks working well, especially in times of crisis. We did the same with building in a substitution stat holiday policy that allowed for, which was quite easy. We actually took what Anamike's work had already done and copied their calendar and actually just built in a stat holiday policy that allowed folks to have holiday days off that were not built on colonial or Christian holidays, but could take days off that were reflective of the days that they wanted to celebrate. So that was instituted quite quickly. We did an equity audit of all of our policies across Makeway, not just our HR policies, and hired Howell Mears consulting company to do that. So those are basic foundational things to do that have an immediate impact on the lives of all of our staff across the board, that showed that we were actually really interested in creating long-lasting, deep foundational change that had impact on folks' lives, so that anything else that we added on top of that would be helpful, but we had some of those deep embedded foundational supports. Also building teams and hiring staff who are actually interested in pushing the envelope and creating structures that are different. So hiring team members who are excited to lead in new ways, or build teams that are leading decision-making practices differently or more fluid and agile structures. So I think there's lots of research and lots of really great stuff we can take from different industries about how to create teams that are not only getting good work done, but are also facilitating dispersed decision-making models. You can take a lot from agile learning or sociocracy or flatarchy structures. And so do you have team members who are coming in? Have you created supports to try out new ways of working and building teams that could foster, different types of conversation around how to get good work done together? So building some of those foundational practices and trying those things out. Another question to be sitting with is, do we have leaders who understand intention versus impact, and we're really focused on the impact of their decisions and actions, what they're asking staff and their teams to do? And are we bringing in other practitioners or educators from other spaces who are able to articulate the deep need to focus on impact, the impact of decisions that are being made, or policies, or conversations that leaders are having with their staff? I highly recommend the work of BK Chan and Rania El Mugamar, both of whom spent time with our Makeway team in the last 6 months, breaking down systems of oppression and anti-racism and tangible ways for employees to engage deeply in some of those concepts. So who are you inviting in to your spaces who can come up with new ideas around how to ensure that the impacts of either your policies, your procedures, your structures, the ways you're making decisions, what you're prioritizing in your annual work plans, all of those things are coming from an informed sense, not a sense of not just what is it's going to support the well-being of your staff, but also understands the impact of some of those structural things on all of your staff, in particular those who are typically impacted the most by oppressive structures. Also sitting with the question of, do we have teams, especially leadership teams, who are ready and being prepared to sit in discomfort? There's a lot of rhetoric around be ready to be in, or you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's never comfortable to be uncomfortable, but we can be ready for it, knowing it's going to happen, knowing that tensions and conflicts are always present. It's our job to figure out what they are. Can we see them? Do we know how to get out of our own way and get others out of the way, to see the tensions that are taking place, to truly listen? And do we understand that characteristics of white supremacy manifest in urgency, or needing to take fast, quick action to solve problems, defaulting to things that we know, and so going back to old ways and old structures, taking things personally, judging or pushing to the side well-being practices that we know we need, especially in times of tension or crisis. So do we have teams to really, really deeply get into and understanding that conflict and tension exists? And it's not about us being comfortable, but it is about us being ready. The incredible DEI practitioner Lily Zhang, who wrote in their newest book, Reconstructing DEI, wrote that no matter how hard we try as practitioners, our actions will not result in the complete absence of harm. In the time it takes to change deep-rooted inequities in our organizations and environments, those inequities and the way they manifest in our interpersonal relationships, experiences with systems and structures, and shared experiences and values will likely continue causing harm. People will say the wrong thing, behave in ways that make others feel excluded or hurt, and refuse to change practices and processes that maintain inequity. because we can't eliminate harm immediately, though we can try to reduce it, it's imperative that we're able to handle and address it when it happens. This is a big one that I'm personally, and our organization is personally in right now, of understanding that we can't always get rid of harm. We can do our best to reduce it, but this ongoing journey means that harm is being caused. You'll lose really good people along the way. You will make lots of mistakes. There will be lots of misunderstandings. And it's up to us to continue doing the work and bringing in other folks who are constantly in this work to talk about how do we deal with conflict and create spaces of learning, healing, and accountability to continue to move forward. And so all of that is about building teams who are constantly talking about and thinking about how to build and bring anti-oppressive practices into our workspaces. I think it's crucial for those of us in positions of earned or unearned power, knowing that power is the ability to influence an outcome. Think about ongoing tangible steps we're taking to build cultures where we're talking about this when no one else is watching. So this kind of anti-oppressive work can't be relegated to HR spaces. It cannot happen off the side of our desks. In particular, folks in racialized and Indigenous and disabled communities who are helping have to be compensated for doing this work. But I also think it's really important to build out time for ourselves outside of our workspaces where we're practicing something new. If we actually want to shift power dynamics and find new ways of working together, we all have to be in spaces where that's being practiced. So going to communities who are using transformative justice practices or restorative justice practices to take care of each other and learn how that's actually happening. Or being immersed in cultures who have ways of working and addressing conflict that builds relationships instead of breaks them apart or cancels them. Getting creative and innovative is what's needed to shift from what is so well ingrained. So how do we go outside of the workplace to learn from others? And also outside of sectors or outside of work entirely? What can we learn from the health space or early childhood education, or how communities are taking care of themselves through mutual aid? There's so much to learn from the disabled community about how they took care, how we took care of each other in spaces, especially around COVID. All of this can inform how we take care of each other and allow for good work to be done. And are we creating learning spaces and building learning organizations that are less punitive and allow for mistakes while also creating spaces for healing and accountability? Learning is not a one-time thing, it's a daily endeavor. So my sister was talking about running a marathon, and building to a marathon race takes 1,000 daily walks or runs or wheels. You have to build the muscle memory to make big shifts. This happens in our daily practices, in the moment comments, exchanges every day at work. It's in the moments of gossip that we call in and out. The granular details build culture, and it's embodied leadership. And oftentimes we might not know what to do, but we know it in our bodies when things feel wrong or right. And it's our job to be able to embody the leadership and facilitate saying these are things that aren't working and we have to change it. I know I only have a few more minutes, but I think we also need to be talking about the capacity strengthening supports that we're building into and resourcing in our work priorities. We need to stop assuming people in positions of leadership have had time or support or resources to strengthen the inherent capacities needed to do anti-oppressive work really well. And so what can that look like? I think it's how we ensure our dominant culture colleagues in positions of power have spaces for learning and unlearning that don't rely on the labor of others, in particular our Black, Indigenous, racialized colleagues and disabled and trans colleagues. And we also need to create spaces for those colleagues, not asking them to teach how to be more equitable in spaces, but also create spaces for healing, and true well-being. I think Louise Adongo this morning in the plenary brought up some really amazing ideas around rest, like who gets rest and who needs rest is such a vital question. Thinking about the well-being spaces that we're actively curating, it isn't a one size fits all. We need to have well-being supports and care supports and for folks in different ways. And I think we need to ensure that we're building in our work plan and work priorities, the spaces for creating the kind of leadership that is going to be reflective, and feedback spaces, truly, like the feedback spaces that we're creating. So we actually know what we're doing is creating impact. And how do we know what we're doing is creating the impact that we want? How do we have feedback mechanisms that center diverse voices, not tokenize them, not asking folks to do work for us, but not make assumptions that what we're doing is working? This is a big one that the team is struggling with right now. How do we make sure that we have good feedback mechanisms, knowing there are times that we have to step back, times that we have to be bridge builders, and times we need to ask if our work is even working at all, and if we need to stop it altogether. The last couple of things I'll say is Make Way as an organization is going through a number of large sort of invitations in anti-oppressive leadership work this year. Things like we're talking about how we build a senior leadership team that's not only reflective of the diversity of community that makes up the rest of our organization, staff, and ecosystem, but how do we also ensure that the team and spaces that new leaders enter into are not performative, but are actually spaces where folks can bring their brilliance and feel the commitment of creating safety, where new ways of working are being valued, and where we create healing and restorative practices to support that. We're being challenged by our organization to share more openly, internally and externally, our learnings, our successes, our failures, and to create transparency in our communications, but also in ways that add to the collective learning conversation. And how are we creating opportunities for rest and healing and caretaking and embodied supports while not feeling like our programmatic priorities are taking the hit? So, and I'm personally sitting with a lot of those actions and my role in that in the year ahead. I struggle a lot with how to slow down in my work and not play into urgency culture, even as I'm feeling pretty desperate to create changes that I know are so needed, and in our work and in who we partner with. I'm sitting a lot with how to step aside for new leadership to come in, and how to support and be an ally for folks to be successful in those spaces, but also to not put my own biases about what success looks like in those spaces on folks in ways that could hinder creativity or new ideas. And so what's the balance of like creating like a learning environment, but also setting folks up for success, knowing that success doesn't need to and probably shouldn't look like what I do. So I'd love to also just throw it all for you in the chat, because I know we're at time. Things that you're sitting with, questions, things that you're trying out, and in particular, if you're interested in engaging more in this sort of community of practice, I'd absolutely love that. Or if you things you disagree with, stuff that I'm saying, or you want to challenge on, like all of those pieces would be just so deeply welcomed. It's hard to do much out of 25 minutes other than hopefully give enough to chew on to engage with each other more. So I'm going to go to the chat and put my email address in. But would love to have some thoughts or ideas or questions or things in the chat, and just deeply appreciate your time and being here. It is so precious. And thanks very much for holding space with me.
Thank you so much, Erin, for sharing those powerful insights with us on some tangible examples of anti-oppressive leadership. I think the nature of workshops is that they keep people engaged and have them walking away with action items. You did a really great job of culminating all of those learnings from Make Way and your professional and personal journey in that. So thank you so much. And from me, a former colleague of yours, I really deeply appreciate sharing this space and time with you as well. Everyone who's in this session, you can now transition to the keynote session, which is on stream 1. You should be able to see that in your event hub. And a quick reminder, I know that there were some technical difficulties at the beginning of the session. All of the sessions for the summit are recorded if you did miss those for a few minutes, and you will be able to access those after the event. Thank you so much for joining this session on facilitating anti-oppressive leadership. And thank you, Erin, for being here with us today.
Thanks, Dwayne. You're the best.
You're better. Bye, folks.